Right. Welcome to Microcollege. Microcollege is the podcast of Thoreau College. We are a microcollege initiative, as you might guess, based in rural Wisconsin. Um, our flagship program is the Metamorphosis Gap Semester, which we are now accepting applications for the fall of 2024, and many other short programs, including a Shakespeare intensive, and then a summer field school focused on regenerative agriculture and bioregional ecological literacy coming up in May and June, and many other short programs. So check us out on the web at thoreaucollege.org. This week, we are really excited to be able to welcome a person I've been hoping to speak to for a long time, actually. This is Blake Boles. Thank you for joining us, Blake.
My pleasure, Jacob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Blake, I just like to, I'll start by reading your bio, and I just have a little story connected with this that I'd love to share. So, Blake Boles is the founder and the director of Unschool Adventures and the author of Why Are You Still Sending Your Kids to School? The Art of Self-Directed Learning, Better Than College, and College Without High School. He hosts the Off Trail Learning podcast and has delivered over 75 presentations for education conferences, alternative schools, and parent groups. Blake and his work have appeared on the New York Times, the Christian Science Monitor, BBC Travel, and other publications. In 2003, Blake was studying astrophysics at UC Berkeley when he stumbled upon the works of John Taylor Gatto, Grace Llewellyn, and other alternative education pioneers. Deeply inspired by the philosophy of unschooling, Blake custom designed his final 2 years of college to focus exclusively on education theory. After graduating, he joined the Not Back to School camp community and began writing and speaking widely on the subject of self-directed learning. In his previous lives, Blake worked as a high-volume cook, delivery truck driver, summer camp director, aurora borealis research assistant, math tutor, outdoor science teacher, camp medic, ski resort market researcher, web designer, and windsurfing instructor. His biggest passion is sharing his enthusiasm and experience with young adults who are blazing their own trails through life. So that's a great, I really enjoyed hearing the rest of that, a lot of that story. And there's a point of connection there that I really appreciated with my own story. Usually we base the podcast discussions here on people's biographies and love to dig into that deeply. But in this case, in my own story, when I was in high school, my first couple years of high school, I was going to a mainstream Catholic school, and as you can talk about in detail, was kind of bored with it, and had a taste of something different in a Waldorf education context earlier than that. But my mother, who was a little bit of a trickster, is still very much one, gave me a couple books as a 15-year-old, and they were John Taylor Gatto's Dumbing Us Down and Grace Llewellyn's The Teenage Liberation Handbook.
That's more than a trickster. That's
Yeah.
subversive.
Yeah, and of course that, along with a couple other moments, were really life-changing, pivotal kind of moments. And the community in which Thoreau College is located here in Viroqua, Wisconsin, is filled with people who are thinking outside of the box in agriculture and in how they live their lives in various ways, including education. What the result of this was not, in my case, unschooling, but the creation of an alternative high school, the Youth Initiative High School, with a strong participatory governance component, and is very much the basis of my experience as an educator. So those names mean a lot to me, and it's really fun to see them grounded. So yeah. Maybe you've this points a little bit back to the same time period, but generally, on this podcast, we start by asking people, where were you 18 to 21, years old? Where you were in college, and what was shaping you? And I think we're beginning of this answer, but could you take us back to that time and talk a bit about who you were then and how you came to be doing what you're doing now?
Sure. I was in college. I went pretty much straight to university with a one semester break in community college. And I went to UC Berkeley in the San Francisco Bay Area to study astrophysics, which I had two reasons for studying astrophysics. One is because I was totally enchanted by the movie Contact from 1997 with Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey, and she's an astrophysicist and makes contact with extraterrestrial civilizations, and she and McConaughey have these long discussions about science and religion, and I just sort of naively assumed that's what it's like to be a research scientist. It,
In
it only took
linguistics
about
too. That's a great movie.
yeah, it's a great movie. And it took me about 2 years of actually studying physics and astronomy and advanced math to be thoroughly disabused of that notion, and observing the lives of graduate students as they actually existed in the academic environment. And I was essentially not interested in that kind of life. Um, the other reason I went to study astrophysics at Berkeley is because it's nice to tell people I study astrophysics at Berkeley. It essentially signals I'm a smart person. Aren't I incredible? And this was the story of the result of my experience in school. I never had to try too hard to get straight A's. It felt good to be on the top of the academic hierarchy. I went to fairly, I'd say, middle of the road public schools growing up in Bakersfield, California. So these were not like super tough elite high schools either. And so I arrived at UC Berkeley with a bunch of other, actually pretty smart, pretty creative young adults. And there was this adjustment period. For the first year, so around age 18, I still spent a lot of time in my room playing computer games with my roommate and doing my homework and kind of hiding a bit and not really participating in the social environment. But I was lucky in a way that UC Berkeley was so impacted at that time that they couldn't actually offer me space in the dorms like they guarantee most first year students. And so I had to go looking for private options, and I found the Student Cooperative Association of Berkeley. It's not actually associated with the university. It's a longstanding nonprofit. And I moved into a 125 person co-ed house slash dorm slash ship called Casa Zimbabwe. And this was a democratically organized affair that cost a lot less than the dorms did, because in the co-ops, you don't hire anyone to do the cooking or the cleaning or the managing. We did all of that ourselves. We had these sometimes atrociously long weekly democratic decision-making meetings where we used Robert's Rules of Order, and there'd be typically 90 people who would show up for that meeting, and maybe 70 who would stick around to the end. And everyone had to do 5 hours of work per week for the co-op. And so I was immediately thrust into the position of being on a weeknight cooking crew and making these dinners for, again, about 90 people. And I had never met a vegan before, but all of a sudden I was cooking for vegetarians and vegans. And so that was this wonderful social environment that I got to participate in during this age range of 18 to 21. And as I moved away from the research science idea as being something I seriously wanted to pursue, I was becoming more open to the idea of becoming an educator and using my science background to perhaps become a high school science teacher. That's when I discovered those books about alternative schooling and books by former teachers and educators who had seen how the sausage is made and had stepped far, far away from that world. And there's one other major influence during that time period was going back to work for a wilderness summer camp in the mountains of California, which I could talk more about if you'd like. But that's mostly what was going on for me at age 18 to 21.
Yeah, those shared living experiences are, of course, so important to what we're doing, here with the microcollege, movement. I was speaking recently with a person who is taking up this work, trying to start something in Europe, where, of course, legal and educational standards are quite different, and also living circumstances. And they're trying to explain to people how important it is that people are living together in this context to do the kind of things you're talking about, cooking for each other, working out the conflicts that come when you live together. And that's interesting to see that show up in your biography too. But also, camps and wilderness experiences are important. Maybe, yeah, if you could share a little bit about that as well, because that's something that's been a thread, I think, from your life.
There's a really unique summer camp near Lake Tahoe, but actually just on the other side of the mountains, very close to an area called Desolation Wilderness. And the camp is called Deer Crossing. And I went there for 4 summers as a kid, mostly for 2-week overnight sessions. There's no road access to this camp. You have to either hike in on a trail or be boated in. And it's a real kind of self-sufficient camp. It was formerly run, it was built and run for a while by Boy Scouts, but then they abandoned it because it was too difficult to maintain. And just that setting alone makes this camp very unique. But the camp director, Jim Wiltons, is a sort of Indiana Jones type figure who goes on these incredible adventures, and then he lectures for public schools and for tech companies in the Bay Area about creativity, sometimes dressing up in full costume as Leonardo da Vinci, or he's a magician. He's just kind of this larger than life figure. And so that was an experience to go there as a kid and do my first backpacking trips, learn how to canoe. Jim was always very big on taking kids seriously and treating them like they are capable of really learning hard skills. And so there was a lot of serious competency building that was part of that experience. And so going back to work for him as a young adult was an eye-opener in many ways because, and this is something that I often feel is something that's hard to find nowadays, especially for young adults who are looking for real mentorship or someone who can really be like a friend, but also give you some serious critique and feedback and push you towards hard steps of personal growth. Jim demanded competency from his staff, and he would not budge on that standard. And sometimes this could feel very difficult. It could feel belittling. It could feel like this guy doesn't respect me, or he won't listen to my voice. But he demanded that you either shape up or ship out.
Mm-hmm.
And so I actually almost got fired from that camp in the first couple of weeks of working there because I was more interested in reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez instead of raking pine needles on the forest floor for fire prevention. And I would just sort of give myself little breaks. And he said, no, 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 that's not how this camp works. We all put in 110% here. And when you think you're done with something, then you come and you find someone, you say, what else needs doing? And so this experience of just totally dedicating yourself to, in this case, it really was kind of an isolated little utopian community out here in the wilderness. That was a huge, huge thing for me. And getting over that initial hump of being like, oh, either I'm going to continue to be a bit, I guess lazy is the judgmental word I could use for my habits at that time, or I can just give this camp my all. I worked there for 2 summers, ages 20 and 21, and later I went back to work there as the assistant director. I became the cook. I became the deputy director while Jim left to go ride camels across Mongolia, and yeah, without, I think, these dual influences, or even trifecta, of having the wilderness camp and learning how to work hard from a very hard-assed mentor and boss, but also a friend. The student cooperative experience of like living in this crazy, vibrant, multifaceted, co-created community, and then also having the academic experience, which when I decided to walk away from research science and become full-time pursuing kind of education theory, but not regular education theory, alternative education theory, self-directed learning theory. Yeah, it was an incredibly rich young adulthood to have those 3 influences in my life, and I don't know who I would be today with even taking away one of those.
Yeah, that's I think my sense of the through line from those 3 influences is, I think a lot of people's experience, my own experience in my earlier the schooling where I was before setting off on this journey of alternative education, and I think many young people in conventional education, is that their time is not taken seriously, right? And I think a hard ass kind of boss like that, person who really insists that you're here for a reason, and we you can do it, and we know, and we're going to assume that you can do it, right? Is so different from the attitude that our schooling systems are built on, that people are actually, kids are incompetent. They need to, they're not taken seriously in a way. And as a person working with young people, I certainly see that the moment that you say, yeah, you can do this, and we expect you to do it, like there's something that changes. And So yeah, I think self-directed learning, unschooling. There's a couple of different kind of descriptors for the general picture of this this field that you I think are really a leading voice in. I'm wondering if you could explicate about where you are right now with that. How do you describe the general paradigm that you're working with, and maybe also just maybe before we dig into some of the details of different things that you've done, what is kind of the theory of human nature? What is the anthropology that you need to have in order to assume these quite different approaches to education or to life, really, that these are embodied in these paradigms?
It's a great question. I think that it's a generally positive theory of human nature, and it's one that's, I'd say, progressive and liberal with like lowercase p and lowercase l, in the sense of, um, yeah, this is not a fixed pi universe that we're living in. We can create something that's bigger and better for essentially everyone as time goes by. Um, I'd say that the unschooling philosophy writ large is romantic in the sense of like it's very rooted in Rousseau, and if you're just looking for the thing that kicked off anyone's ideas that unschooling or self-directed learning is possible, go read Rousseau, go read Emily, his famous book about a young adult being tutored and given a lot of freedom and responsibility. Um, and I have mixed feelings about romanticism at this point in my life, and I've spent enough time around unschoolers, around people who are really into alternative schools, whether that means people who created alternative schools, young people who attended them, parents who got to witness their young people attending them, to know that it's not so simple. It's not as simple as just give people freedom and then magical things happen. But that is the very compelling narrative that sells us, I believe, or at least sold me and many people I know, on taking this approach from the beginning. I remember being very enamored by the Sudbury Valley School when I first got into this realm. And for those who are not familiar, it's this pioneering K through 12 private independent school in outside of Boston in Massachusetts. And they are extremely serious and consistent about being hands off. There's lots of adults who are there on staff, but they do not intervene in the lives and affairs of the students who are there unless they are explicitly asked to do so. And so it's a real model of how to give kids resources, how to give them community without applying any sort of pressure to then do something with that. And you really are allowed to sit there on the couch and do nothing all day for weeks or months or years at a place like the Sudbury Valley School. And I admire many other places that give kids this level of freedom and responsibility. And there's a long-standing tension for me between this school-based approach, which always feels more familiar since most of us did go to schools ourselves, and so it's easier to think of an alternative school instead of a much different kind of alternative. And a school where you look out and you still have this like pretty broad peer group and community versus a more homeschooling or unschooling approach, a more family-based approach. And there are entire schools of thought about why homeschooling or unschooling might be the more natural choice. And there's arguments rooted in hunter-gatherer or forager societies. And Peter Gray is one of the leading voices, I think, pushing that argument forward. And I just see tensions and conflict all around. And I'm no longer a true believer in anything in the alternative education realm. And I took a pretty strong stand in the last education book that I wrote, the Why Are You Still Sending Your Kids to School, for essentially agnosticism in the realm of education, and to say there is no correct path. There might be a correct path for your specific kid for a while in their life. Unschooling might be the perfect thing that your 7-year-old needs for 4 years. And then they might want and need to go back to a public school. They might need that experience. There are so many young people who want to be part of the essentially the standard path of humanity, at least for a while, and are no longer content to just accept their parents. And by parents, this usually means their mom's kind of strong feelings that school is a dangerous or harmful or questionable place. And they're like, I want to go experience this for myself. And I think that that should be respected. And when I think about respect and autonomy for young people, it doesn't mean that the parents choose the educational approach which the parents think is respectful and autonomous. Because then we'd say unschooling or going to a highly liberated school like the Sudbury Valley School is the only way, because that's the maximum autonomy, maximum respect possible. But no, it means letting young people take charge and make their own mistakes, and that might even include making the mistake to go into some horribly, seemingly oppressive and vicious school environment, because they want to try it out. They want to see if they can handle it or if it's worth the package deal. Those are some of my beliefs at this moment about the realm of alternative education, self-directed learning, and the philosophy that underpins it.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate that, the perspective on, the respect for the individual student has got to be paramount here, and that can lead to things that seem paradoxical or to, differences. And I'm the father of four kids, and they're all different, right? And I think that's when you start to have, especially multiple kids like that, not one form of education, not one kind of approach, all the way through is necessarily going to be the right one for everyone. And I think that's actually built into the paradigm that you're carrying forward, and it's really modeled by some of these thinkers powerfully. And I asked the question about the kind of the theory of human nature, because I've been reading John Taylor Gatto's books, Dumbing Us Down. I think everyone wants a really quick spark into this world. It's a powerful text. And then his The Underground History of American Education is like my red pill kind of moment about, and he's very serious there about look at what is the model of a person that is embodied in the structures and forms and even the buildings, right, where education is happening. As I've gone forward, that has been always a reminder to me, what is, what are we assuming about that people are like, and what does it mean to be educated, and what is a community like that? And that has to be, whether you're aware of it or not, you have a paradigm, and it's shaping the way a school or a educational process or structure some kind of set up.
Yeah, and John Taylor Gatto, I still recommend to people. I still adore his writing. I was also red pilled, so to speak, by the Underground History of American Education. Although you can read parts of that or any of his writing and find stuff that feels a bit conspiracy theorist and feels a bit far out there. But if you take it as a whole, I'm a big fan of him, and I really like to recommend to people find his book, A Different Kind of Teacher. I found that even more powerful than Dumbing Us Down, and it's normal book length as opposed to the the huge tome, which is the Underground History of American Education.
Yeah, that book, it is totally like a shaggy monster of a book, right? And it's, I think like some of the great works of philosophy in the past. Like, you certainly wouldn't want to adopt or assume, any like that as a whole as your system. You'd be sort of mad, actually. But just kind of the energy and the kind of emotion of it is very powerful.
Yeah.
Could you say a little bit about Gatto's bio, and then also Grace Llewellyn, right? Who I know, I mean, you've worked with, right?
Yeah, and she's a close friend, and I was recently hanging out and dancing tango with her here in Buenos
Oh,
Aires.
wow.
Yeah. Yeah, John Taylor Gatto was this award-winning New York City public school teacher. He won Teacher of the Year in New York State and New York City multiple times in a row in the late 80s, early 90s, and then he quit teaching. He wrote an op-ed to the Wall Street Journal saying he no longer wanted to make a living hurting kids anymore. And he essentially began writing and lecturing widely on what he sees as the foundational problems of the American school system, in both public and private. And he's just to quickly go back to the question about human nature. Gatto has this wonderful view of human nature. He says that we want to be free. We want to be free to create, to associate with each other. I'd say that his biggest hope was that we could have more of a robust civil society. And he would often talk about earlier parts of American history as having a more robust civil society in which we kind of took care of each other and created our own little associations and didn't wait and hope and expect that other people, and he has, a pretty big libertarian anti-government streak to him, that we don't wait for like the government to come and solve our problems, or we don't wait for some father figure to come and solve our problems. Like, we are free, competent individuals and we can solve our own problems. But to be institutionalized in something like a modern school, a giant, he was against the massification of American society, but it's really global society. He was really up against some pretty big global forces there. To be institutionalized in something like a modern school is to be put into a powerless, dependent state, and to be told to wait and to sit down and to be given orders, and that is what I think he saw as the most insidious part of this effect. It's like, are the classes really the thing that's going on there? No, it's the socializing and the expectations that are created.
Yeah.
And Grace Llewellyn, also a teacher, although not for as long as Gatto was a teacher, and she saw and she got to work in both like really hard and really nice / easy school situations, and she got to be at this very small, very experiential, very progressive school. And she saw that even there, fundamentally, it was about controlling the lives of students, that even there, they were not given any real sense of autonomy. They were not treated seriously. And so she decided to quit also. And she wrote the book that I still think is, and I'm biased here because I was the editor for the last iteration of the Teenage Liberation Handbook. The subtitle of that book is How to Quit School and Get a Real Life in Education. And I just think it's still a complete powerhouse. But what she did that Gatto didn't is she created a community where people come together who are practicing this. She created Not Back to School Camp, which continues to be a community that operates in Oregon and Vermont. And the session in Oregon, the long-standing one, might have about 100 teens who show up, plus about 15 or 20 staff. And I've been on her staff team since 2006. And that work, I believe, is just as important as the writing and the advocacy, for the same reason that people who are creating small alternative schools, microcolleges, gap year programs, in my own case, travel programs for homeschooled and unschooled teenagers. School offers and college offers a very appealing congregation of people. It's like, where do I go to be with my people, or find my people, or be with my peers? And if there are not these congregations, these communities available, then it doesn't matter how many books are written about this. People need to take the chance to actually bring together people face to face in real life. And so that's something that Grace has done, and I have benefited from immeasurably through friendships and connections and learning, and just getting to witness this amazing community of self-directed young people coming together each year.
Yeah. Can you give us a little window into that? What sort of things happen at the Not Back to School camp? And also maybe talk about your programs, your travel programs. Like what is, when you bring a group of people who are self-directed learners, what do you do together?
At Not Back to School camp, it's a free choice camp, and so there are workshops offered throughout the day by both campers and staff. There are big evening events that are typically all camp, but I say that with air quotes because they're still optional. And I like to tongue-in-cheek call those the hippie bonding events, because it's these kind of they could feel a bit cultish and ritualistic, I think, for a first-time camper. But quickly you realize, like, this is the heart and soul of the camp. And I don't want to divulge anymore. I don't want to throw out any spoilers in case anyone might go to that camp. Fundamentally, all you have to do as a teenager at Not Back to School Camp is show up for the two all camp meetings. So one after breakfast and one after dinner, which are fairly brief, and then go to your advisee group. And that would mean you would meet with someone like me, an advisor, and about 10 other campers for about half an hour each day. And we do check-ins, so emotional check-ins, and we might play some games, we might have some discussions. It's pretty brief, might talk about something that's going on at camp, and I am given a lot of autonomy as an advisor in that respect, as long as we do the check-ins. That's an important part of the culture. So I was really inspired by Not Back to School Camp because there's so much magic that takes place when you are given this amount of autonomy. Like, some of the workshops are really cool and memorable, but there are entire cultures that arise in this free time. And there's a lot of campers who never go to a single workshop, but they are hanging out and having these deep conversations. They are doing art. They are sometimes creating like entire faux religious movements and trying to recruit followers to their faux religions and having holy wars with other religious, these are all, completely joking religions, but they love it. They're creating worlds. And so I took a cue from Not Back to School Camp when I started my travel company, Unschool Adventures, in 2008, which was born from my experience working at the Wilderness Summer Camp and seeing their transformational teen leadership program, and my own desire to travel internationally more, and also working in the broader field of outdoor education, and realizing that I really wanted to work for myself and do things my own way. And so I organized a trip to Argentina in 2008. And while there was definitely some structure to parts of this 6-week trip, it started with some homestays in Spanish school. It ended with some tango lessons in Buenos Aires. But during those phases, and then in the squishy middle of the trip, the young adults, so ages 14 to 19, were given very genuine autonomy to choose how to spend their time while they're on this international adventure. This was a 6-week trip. It wasn't rushed. And because they're all homeschooled or unschooled, or some of them are beyond compulsory education age, there was no obligation to do anything that is, quote, educational. And so what I tried to offer them was the same experience that I had when I first traveled to Europe when I was 19 with friends, and I really had choice and freedom to do what I wanted. And on that trip, I did a lot of what the Lonely Planet guidebook told me to do, and that included going to a bunch of museums and seeing art. And within a few weeks, I was like, I don't want to go to another museum. I don't care about art. Like, I'll go to a few such places, but I realized that I need to stop checking boxes because it's just exhausting. And that is when I started to develop this awareness of, like, what is the actual interesting part of travel? And it's much more about wandering around cities and towns and maybe going on hikes, exploring, having this time to, like, develop relationships with the people you're traveling with, having conversations that go off the rails and enter places unknown. And so that is what I wanted to offer the young people on my trips. And the only way to do that, kind of like Not Back to School Camp or the Sudbury Valley School would do, is to not monopolize all of their time. And so we still had, and whenever I've run trips, we've always had evening meetings. We'll eat together. We will have check-ins. I want to make sure everyone feels seen and heard each day, that there's kind of like the co-ops that I lived in at Berkeley. There's always a chance for anyone, a genuine chance for them to speak up and say if something's not working for them, what is it? How can we work through this? And then it's like, okay, I'm going to go do my own thing. And that's, I think, often the hard part for adults working with self-directed learners is you need to be genuinely okay with doing your own thing, and you need to have your own life outside of your investment in these young people. So what that would look like for me on these international trips is, well, I'm going to go take my laptop to this cafe over here, and I'm going to write or read some articles and I'll be available on my phone in case there's some sort of emergency, but I'm doing my own thing. Like, I'm really not here to tell you what to do. Like, if you have questions, I will help you brainstorm, but otherwise, like, please go figure it out yourself. And that means go get bored, go get into a little bit of trouble, go kind of struggle and have some conflict with each other. Like, this is what you're here for, is to create this thing yourself with a bit of help, a bit of scaffolding. But I'm not here to do this for you. That's a big emotional challenge for
Yeah.
adults who are involved in the lives of young people.
That's one of the questions I wanted to ask you because I think I have really from fairly early age as an adult at least had a sense of education, being an educator, being a teacher as a vocation, and I think people like John Taylor Gatto and Grace Llewellyn are also clearly master educators, right? And I see that in you as well. And so, given what this paradigm of unschooling and self-directed learning, how does a person with a vocation, right, with a calling to be an educator, how do they think about their work? Because there's a very like kind of a standardized kind of picture of a teacher standing in front of a class, giving a lecture or something like that people carry around in their heads. And if you've kind of criticized that, or you've come to see the limitations of that perspective, but you still have a calling to work with young people. Like how do you think about that?
Well, I think it's worth asking yourself, what were the most educational experiences in your own life? And when I think about that question, I think about going to the wilderness summer camp, Deer Crossing, as a young person. And that did include formal instruction in windsurfing or kayaking, sailing, backpacking. I'm very thankful that someone said, here's how you bury your poop in the wild. Here's specifically how you do it. Here's how you clean up a campsite so it looks better than the moment you arrived. And so I'm not against formal instruction. Some of the best classes I had at Berkeley were classes they were elective classes that I never expected to take. One was on international development policy, and so those all have a place, and I enjoy teaching content every now and then too. But again, what are the like? If you had to choose the top 10% of like transformational moments in your life, where do they come from? Most of us are probably not going to say it was definitely a content delivery in some sort of traditional school or college. Those might be some highlights, but probably it's going to be a relationship you had with someone, or a travel experience, or something you did in the outdoors, or taking a job where you're given like this overwhelming amount of responsibility you didn't think you could handle. These are all real life experiences. And yeah, one of my favorite quips from John Taylor Gatto is, kids need adventure more than they need algebra. And I just think that is true on the face of it. And so that has shaped my own efforts to be an educator in the world, which is just, where's the highest value add? And especially, where are there gaps in the offerings? And I think that's one of the reasons that I was able to start a travel company. I've had lots of people approach me over the years and be like, how do I start something like Unschool Adventures? And I say, man, I'm not even sure. Like, I'm not sure how this even worked out for me. Like, entrepreneurially speaking, it was a success very quickly. Now, it was a success because I had only modest desires to make enough money to kind of continue my nomadic traveling lifestyle with a lot of time in the outdoors. It's a pretty low income lifestyle. But it was also a success because there was essentially no one else offering group trips for teenagers who are not on an academic calendar. Because I've always run trips during the school year. So anyone's welcome to come, but pretty much it's only homeschoolers or kids who go to super flexible alternative schools who can practically join these trips. Mm-hmm. So that was a gap in the offerings. And when I think about all the great academic or intellectual content that I've consumed over the years, like, there's just so much of it out there. And I think that's a big reason why we saw homeschooling take off in the 90s. It's parallel to the rise of the internet. Mm-hmm. And so is that something that I want to compete with as an educator? It's like, no, I'd rather harness it and thank God for all the people out there who are creating this incredible content, people who also want to become teachers and professors. What's missing out there? And I think increasingly it's opportunities to take groups to do kind of weird, interesting stuff out in the real world, travel programs, nature programs, uh, people who will run gap year programs that are not the standard offering. And so that's where I think that we continue to have a lot of opportunities as educators who want to make a big difference and don't want to, yeah, play within the traditional rules and boxes. But it comes with risks. It will almost certainly be lower paid and without benefits. You will have to cobble together your own audience. It's not for the faint of heart.
Hmm. Yeah, no, no, I know it. Yeah. That's
Yeah. Do you have any experience in that, Jacob?
no. Yeah, I think that part of the challenge, I think we are working here with young adults, right? People who are 18, and that young adult age is, I think, getting longer. People see themselves in that category well into their 20s at least now, and older. We have inquiries from, but still, if you have been in a fairly mainstream conventional educational stream, you've internalized that checklist, right? That the Lonely Planet kind of like checklist at least that you're talking about. And so sometimes the challenge is creating a context like a gap year program of the kinds that we are doing that is legible to a person who hasn't had a had an opening to another form of education, and then holding the open space that we know is the important space that you're talking about, right? That it is actually the in between the classroom kind of experiences that where so much of the richness happens. And people get it pretty quickly when they're here, but that when they get that transition from not being here to getting here is actually the tricky part. You have to see yourself in that context.
You interviewed my friend Dev Carey, who runs the High Desert Center, and I know
Yeah,
that
he's
that's
great on
something
that.
that he and his wife Marion have been puzzling over for a while, which is how to explain this kind of different kind of gap year program where you are given a lot of autonomy and responsibility to co-create this. And how do you describe that on a web page in a couple of paragraphs that sound appealing? Because you're going up against these other gap year programs where it's like you're going to do a homestay in this country, you're going to see the wonder of the world in this other country, and beautiful photographs, well produced videos. It all looks really good in the same way that you flip through the Lonely Planet guidebook and it's like, oh, you're going to be in Buenos Aires, you can see this famous cemetery, you can go watch a tango show. And when you are actually there checking off all the boxes, you quickly realize I'm just exhausted. Like this is a different kind of burnout. I may not be in the traditional school system, but I'm just here kind of trying to achieve these Instagrammable experiences, and it's not working for me. It's actually it may be fun and interesting for a bit longer than the conventional experience, but it's still not sustainable. And am I really learning something? Am I really changing or being challenged? Uh,
Yeah.
it's tricky.
Yeah. So I think another thing I wanted to ask you about, which I think you've written about and thought about for sure, is this period, 18 to 21-year-old for everyone is a time of transition, right? Whatever your previous education has been, maybe it's a transition out of any kind of formal schooling. If you have been a homeschooler or an unschooler, maybe it is a transition into some more formal, education. I know you've written about, how people who've been, off the trail in the way that you talk about, can actually apply to and kind of and enter the higher education sphere. But also the other way, right? People who are kind of stepping into a different form of of freedom in their time. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about that in from maybe both of those angles. People who have been pretty self-structured into something more structured, and then also people who are looking for finally have the chance to do something that's a little bit less kind of traditional.
Maybe you can give me the question one more time, Jacob. What
Maybe I can split that into
specific
two.
advice are you looking for? Yeah.
Maybe I can split that into two pieces. Let's start with you know, maybe some of the people that you've been working with. what are you seeing, these days that people are who have been unschooling, been self-directed learners in various contexts and forms? What are they doing? Is there any generalizations you could make about what they do as they enter, formal adulthood, 18, years, 1821?
Yeah, yeah, it's a shockingly boring
Yeah.
answer, and that's what I've reported in my books too, which is pretty consistent with their socioeconomic stratum. They will go to college, or they will go into some other sort of formal training program, or they will just start working. And I'd say it's actually quite difficult to differentiate, let's say at age 25, someone who was unschooled from someone who was not, but still had perhaps, open-minded, creative upbringing, maybe slightly more alternative or hippie-ish parents, or school, or went to some very progressive school. And so the fears, I think, of young people who have been brought up in this wild, crazy, unschooled alternative realm, they'll never be able to adjust to society, they'll never be able to get a job or thrive in higher education or go on to get a graduate degree. I think it's almost completely unfounded. I'd say as long as there's a chance for these young people to have access to some sort of peer community,
Mhm.
if a kid is truly sheltered away from the world, I'd say regardless of where they are or their background, I'd say that's a big challenge. That can hurt. And so, yeah, there's nothing interesting to report in the realm. But as I tell parents, I think that should be very reassuring,
Mhm.
because that means that you can let go of these anxieties about, like, oh, if I let my kid drop out of school, is it going to ruin them forever? You know, kids' lives get ruined forever in school, also,
Yeah.
too, for different reasons. And uh, if, broadly speaking, your kid's going to turn out the same, regardless of whether they're going to school or they're going to some alternative school or they're unschooling, then just choose the one where the kid seems the most engaged, the least miserable, and the kid has the most personal buy-in for that option at the moment. Um, I don't necessarily see a lot of unschoolers or self-directed learners going on to choose the most alternative and progressive and self-directed higher education options. There's certainly some of them, but many of them just go right back into like the standard education system. And there's many practical reasons for that. If you want to go into some sort of licensed field,
Yeah.
that's a big reason why you should go right back into traditional higher education. So, yeah, that's my exciting, unexciting report from that domain after witnessing young people going through it for roughly 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a question that, I'm working in an alternative high school that doesn't have letter grades, for example, it's really get used to answering that question, right? What happens and can they go to college and, and how does that happen? It's the at least in the United States, right? There are very clear pathways for people, whatever their background, into higher education, that um, very, reliably.
And specifically, the community college system in the United States is a wonderful boon to anyone who wants to have a very alternative K through 12 experience. It's this transition, very inexpensive, very widely accessible transition step back into traditional higher education. And I've realized that many other parts of the world don't have that, or they only have a truncated version of the community college system. So I'm a big proponent of community colleges.
Mhm. Yeah. One question, I wanted to ask you also is, given the length of your time, observing and participating in this realm of education, there's been a lot of technological changes that have happened in the last 20 years. And I mean, something that we are seeing some in our programs are students who they were like homeschooled, or they basically attended school online, and those students sometimes are the most isolated, right? They really didn't have a social kind of a context, and they didn't, the social context that forms around, a really active homeschooling or unschooling community, as well as a school, or a school community. um I'm wondering, pros and cons. What have you seen of the impact of the changes in technology on students that you're working with or on the field of education as you're paying attention to it?
think I'll go back to the previous statement about isolation being tough. I mean, it's tough for adults
Yeah.
too. It's tough for elderly people. And so to the extent that, well, you have to ask whether technology use is a byproduct of isolation rather than causing it. Which direction does causality flow here? And in the book Why You Still Sending Your Kids to School, I make a heavy defense of technology, and especially video games and computer games, which are the most feared, bugaboo, uh, as something that, there's a very valid reason that young people are gravitating towards those. Essentially, because they are meaningful games where they get to feel young people get to feel like they have some power and they're able to influence their world in a way. And I think especially for a lot of young men, there's a lot of community that builds up through multiplayer games, especially something like Fortnite. When I was playing these games, it was Counter-Strike or Warcraft 2, and I have these wonderful memories of developing friendships, albeit these were friendships that were both in real life and also online instead of exclusively online. Um, and learning and feeling genuinely challenged in those environments in a way that I often didn't in school. And so I really was a beneficiary, I believe, of that form of technology. If you're asking me about screen time and phone addiction and whether you can do anything about this, I've seen just as much of those things in the alternative education world as I've seen elsewhere. And really, some of the worst victims of this are just the adults I see
Yeah.
everywhere. And I'm sure you go out to dinner and people are just looking at their phones and across the table from each other. Adults are not strong role models in this regard either. And
No.
so I'd say that's a very broad shift that pretty much doesn't have to do with alternative education. And
But I'm
I
wondering
do
about
think that
go ahead. Go ahead.
I do think that a place like Deer Crossing Camp, which is a true wilderness experience where there's still no cell phone signal, I think places like that will only increase in their value and their cachet and their necessity moving forward. Although it might be a harder sell to get young people to participate in places like that, I think all you need to do is find that one entry point. It could just be a family camping trip, and it just happens to be in a place where there's no cell phone service. And it's very painful at first, in the same way that if you do a meditation retreat, it's really painful the first day or two. And then you start to realize, like, oh, this sense of calm is really nice. And the way this doesn't apply to a meditation retreat, but the depth of conversation that I can have with someone else and not feel the need to check my phone or see someone else being distracted, that's really nice. And so I think that dynamic will continue. It might be trickier to get people to appreciate it, but once they do, and I'm very thankful that I was inceptioned by, the wilderness bug very early in my life, then that will become, a source of calm and power for young people as we kind of move into an age where we are kind of by default, we are cyborgs constantly attached to our devices.
Yeah, and on your travel, when you're in a city in a new country, I think how do you talk about or about technology there? Is there any kind of structure around that, or is that
No,
and have you
no.
seen that change people's experience with the technologies that have come along in those contexts?
I don't talk about technology, and I think my approach is try to offer something that's more interesting than a phone.
Hmm.
And so I led a month-long group trip to Berlin late last year. And the mission of the trip was to go into Berlin and discover the most interesting things that a big city has to offer, especially ones that cost no money or are very cheap. And kind of like preparation for your 20s, right? So you don't think that entertainment must cost money. And I never said a single word about phone. I said you all have to have a phone that has an international data plan so that we can stay in touch over WhatsApp, because
Yeah.
that's an important safety feature. and often on the 40-minute S-Bahn train ride from our hostel, which was kind of on the outskirts of the city and very close to nature, back into the city center. A lot of teens would spend it on their phone, messaging people, scrolling Instagram, whatever. And I just had to do my best to be like, I kind of wish you'd be looking out the window instead, or like talking with each other. And my co-leaders and I did a little bit of incentivizing to, like, maybe we can play games with each other while we're on the train. But fundamentally, my job as the educator and the trip leader was to swallow that and just assume, and maybe this comes back to the philosophy of human nature part, assume that they're doing some things that they want or need to do to sort of stay connected to people, to self-soothe, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And then, what I really paid attention to was on a day-to-day basis when they were out there in the city, were they out, walking and talking to each other and going to places and doing things, or would they just like go to a cafe and sit there on their phones? And as far as I can see, and of course I don't see everything on these trips, they were out there doing stuff. They were doing stuff that was more interesting than their phones. And I just think that the attempts to restrict technology are so futile, and they just like restricting almost anything. It creates a black market for it. It creates a black market for that attention. It makes it seem more interesting and sexy. And if in a school context, I'm a big fan of open phone tests. I'm a big fan of using AI and Googling and Wikipedia and everything. And it's like, these are just parts of our life. You'll be using these on an everyday basis as an adult in your own work. They are not the enemy. And if you don't think that you can complete your mission as an educator while giving young people free access to these technologies, it's like, it's you that needs to upgrade, right? You need to find a better way to test or evaluate. You need to be a better trip leader so that kids aren't so bored on your international trips that they just sit there and use their phones instead of doing the thing you want them to do. So I think technology is a great bellwether for how well we're doing. I don't fear it. And I think that, restricting it is largely counterproductive.
Powerfully stated. Yeah. Cool. Well, I think we're coming up to the end of the hour here, and I think you've given us a lot to think about. And maybe if you could just say where, if people are excited to learn more about your work or about these programs, where can they do that?
Sure. I have my website, blakeboles.com, and where I'm putting my most of my creative efforts these days is into a newsletter called The Adventures of Blake, which you can find by Googling that phrase or by going to blakeboles.com. I ran my podcast Off Trail Learning. You made me realize I need to update my bio
Yeah.
for a number of years, but I've put it on pause because I'm reevaluating where I want to be in the realm of education these days, and so that is not active at the moment.
Yeah. Great. Well, yes, thank you so much for your time, Blake, and for your long-term leadership and voice in this field. So thank you.
It was a really fun conversation. Thanks, Jacob.
All right.